Now, Russia claims its forces have captured territory near a battleground in eastern Ukraine. The town of Chasiv Yar reportedly taken as the U.S. Congress approved unblocking $61 billion in aid for Kyiv. The news out of Washington serving as a much-needed morale boost for Ukrainian soldiers who for months have been warning that they're outgunned and outnumbered on the battlefield. Moscow, meanwhile, dismissing the news that U.S. aid will change anything on the ground, adding it will only prolong the conflict. We can now bring in Oleksandra Matviichuk, a human rights lawyer and head of the Centre for Civil Liberties. Thank you very much for joining us here on the program. I'm also joined by France 24's senior reporter Cyril Paya. Now, you've co-founded the Tribunal for Putin, which documents war crimes, and the Centre for Civil Liberties actually won the Nobel Peace Prize under your leadership. How are you feeling today after what happened in the U.S. over the weekend?
I think that the House of Representatives finally made his job, because according to all sociological polls, people in the United States support Ukrainians' fight for freedom and for democracy. And this is a huge pity that we have this 6 months delay, because each day of delay resulted in numerous deaths in battlefield, in numerous deaths in deep rear, in numerous deaths in occupied territories.
But would you precisely put the responsibility on the Trump team and the Republican who just opposed or delayed this delivery?
I know that we have two-party majority in the House of Representatives, and we have support from Democrats and from Republicans. It was just several people who blocked this bill for 6 months.
Do you fear Donald Trump's potential win in the November election can change things on the ground dramatically for Ukraine? Now we just saw how his influence held up the $61 billion in aid for months.
I have a huge respect to the right of American citizens independently decide whom they want to elect as their president. But it's true that President of the United States have a huge impact to external policy. But regardless of this war has genocidal character. This means that we have no other option, because if we will stop fighting, there will be no more us.
What is your assessment on the new Emmanuel Macron, the French president's stance towards the war? Late February, when President Volodymyr Zelensky came to the Élysée Palace in Paris, we could observe a really change of mindset, of talks. And do you think it's a turning point? And how would you describe this new stance? You said recently that Emmanuel Macron broke a taboo. What did you mean by that?
I'm very grateful that President Macron broke the political taboo to discuss the issue of boots on the ground, because there are different options how it can be realized. For example, by training Ukrainian soldiers or to secure logistics or other things. But before it wasn't on the table, and now because of President Macron initiative, it started to be discussed. And I know that Russia for decades was proactive. Russia did something horrible, then presented like fait accompli and pushed international community to accept this. And this is the first time in my memory when Western democracies start to take initiative, and this is very important.
Last year, Ukraine launched that long-awaited counteroffensive with Western tanks, what have you. It didn't go as planned, clearly. How will this new $61 billion in aid change anything, given that Ukraine will still be outnumbered on the ground?
Let me remind that we was waiting for the first modern tank for more than a year. And we had to start counteroffensive with zero modern plane. And this is something which you in France never allow yourself, because when you can't secure the sky, you can't go to counteroffensive. And Ukrainian soldiers have to do impossible mission to fight back with any possibility to secure Ukrainian sky, which was planted with Russians bombs, Russian planes, etc., etc. And we are still waiting these modern planes, which international partners promised us 2 years already. So I think that we have not underestimated the value of this 60 billion package bill, because it will save thousands and thousands of lives. If even at least it stop Russia, it's a huge thing for the whole Europe, because if we not be able to stop Putin in Ukraine, he will go further.
You think the strategy from the West, which is on the table now, is a strategy to help Ukraine not to fail, or is that the strategy is to help the Ukraine to win actually the war?
Oh, it's a very important issue. It's something which I try to emphasize when I speak with representatives of governments, with presidents, with MPs of different countries. Because when large-scale war started, international communities told, let's help Ukraine not to fail. And we started to obtain the first weapons to be able to defend ourselves. And first, real sanctions were introduced into force against Russia. And we are extremely grateful because it helped us to survive. But it's time to change this narrative from let's help Ukraine not to fail for narrative, let's help Ukraine to win. Because this is a huge differences between these two narratives. And we can practically measure these differences in types of weapons, in speed of sanctions, and gravity of decisions.
But I want to ask you something, because we have had sanctions slapped every which way on Russia, but it seems that the Russian economy is proving too resilient. They know how to work around sanctions, and sanctions don't tend to work. We've seen North Korea, for instance, sanctioned every single way, but they test-fired a missile today. So what will sanctions really achieve, and should something be done to really get both sides to the table and achieve and bring about some sort of peace talks, even though that takes months to bring around?
Sanctions is very essential too. But what Western communities failed, it's failed to close back door for Russia to bypass the sanctions. Because it's not surprise when we find on the battlefield crushed Russian airplanes or crushed Russian drones, we still can find their components from France. We still can find them components and elements from Germany, from United States. It's your company. It's company which operated, created, and provides the taxes for in Western communities. It's obligation of European Union, United States, and other countries to punish violators of sanctions from their own society and close this backdoor of sanctions. It will make sanction work.
There was one word which is resilience. Don't you think the international community and even the Ukrainian government is asking too much resilience from the very people I'm mentioning, for instance, this new conscription law with having more and more people on the ground? Don't you think that there are too much resilience which is requested from the people of Ukraine after these 2 long years?
It's very difficult to be in large-scale war for 2 years. And I will remind that generally we are in a war for 10 years, because this war started not in February 2022, but in February 2014. But in order to be objective, I will provide you the numbers of sociological poll. In February this year, all Ukrainian survey was conducted, and 73% of Ukrainians told we will endure this war as long as it takes. It's a huge number. Why people in Ukraine said this? Because we know that Russians want to eliminate us. They want either eradicate us as Russians or killed.
Now, the war in Ukraine continues as Israel's war in Gaza takes place. We have seen in the past, over 6 months, over 34,000 Palestinians, mainly women and children, killed. The reaction from many Western leaders, most Western leaders, have been markedly different when it comes to talking about what's going on in Gaza versus what went on in Ukraine. The world sees this and has noticed it. Do you think that this has shifted the way global public opinion views the conflict in Ukraine?
I was in the same situation for 8 years, because when we applied about the horror which Russia committed in occupied territories, Crimea and Donbass, the world wasn't interested. They didn't take any actions before large-scale war started. And this is a huge lesson learned, that unpunished evil grows, that if we want to fight for justice, we have to fight for justice globally. And the problem is, which is visible for people in Syria, people in Ukraine, people in Myanmar, in Sudan, Nicaragua, and other countries where in this second people are suffering, that international system of peace and security is not working properly. And this is our obligation to start the cardinal reform of this international system of peace and security. Because for current moment, look what's going on. Security Council is paralyzed. The UN reproduced ritualistic movements. They can't effectively defend people against authoritarianism and the wars. And if we will not change this, I can predict that fires like wars will emerge more and more often in different parts of the globe.
Oleksandra, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us on the program today, as well as Cyril. Thanks for that.
Thank you.